Patel is recognized by U.S. News & World Report as one of America's best leaders as the founder of Interfaith America. At the Bush Center's 2026 Forum on Leadership, Eboo has just received the George W. Bush Institute Citation, which reads, Eboo Patel understands the power of pluralism. Through his leadership and writing, he encourages others to find the dignity in their fellow man regardless of religion or practice. His commitment to mutual respect strengthens our country by demonstrating how profound differences can coexist with shared democratic values. On this day, April 16th, 2026, let it be recognized that Eboo Patel is cited for his leadership, courage, and dedication to protecting religious liberty in the United States of America. Welcome to our guest today, Eboo Patel. Eboo, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
And our co-host is Chris Walsh, Director of Freedom and Democracy here at the George W. Bush Institute. Chris, thank you for being here.
I'm really excited to be here. And actually, can I go riff a little bit and tell you why I'm excited to be here?
I feel like I couldn't stop you if I tried.
It's fair. Usually this is, for our listeners, sometimes when we're paired together, this is where I would insert something about the Celtics versus the Mavs or, Patriots versus Cowboys. But it's a little more serious today. I was driving into the office this morning, and for the first time, I had listened to former Senator Ben Sasse's podcast, his Not Dead Yet, and I had avoided it consciously because it seemed to me, I knew what he was trying to do, but it kind of scared me a little bit. I've had people, he's battling terminal cancer right now. He knows he's at the end of his path, and I have people in my immediate family who have beat cancer, who are battling cancer, who have beaten cancer. And so for that reason, I didn't want to hear it. And I forced myself to listen to it today. And I'm glad I did. Because what he is exhibiting, he basically wants to tell people, his audiences, we all have short time on this earth. And how do we prioritize what's most important? How do we find joy? And I think two things can be true at once. I think right now in this country, we've lost our joy. I think we're choosing hatred, and we're not meant for hatred. But at the same time, with these two kind of contradictory things being true, there's so much good going on in our country right now of people not hating, of finding connections across differences, about being who they are, but realizing they don't have to hate someone who's different than them. Which is why I was particularly excited to have you, Eboo, today, because that's what you do for a living. You're a hero, and I appreciate you being here.
Well, I'm not a hero, and I have also been avoiding the Ben Sasse podcasts because I don't want to think about death, and I think he's actually approaching it in a very profound way. So I know that when I finally confront that and listen to it, which I will at some point, it will be unavoidable, except to think about those deep issues. But Chris, I also want to make a couple of comments on joy and hatred for a minute here. So I used to listen to all kinds of current event stuff in the car, and I don't anymore. I just listen to the Grateful Dead. I'm serious. I just listen to the Grateful Dead.
Grateful's right in there.
That's right. And, because I just need to spend a certain amount of time in a space of joy. And Bruce Springsteen gives me joy, and Jerry Garcia gives me joy. And that is, it's not an escape. It's actually human civilization. It's civilization, right? That John Courtney Murray, the great Jesuit priest and philosopher, said, civilization is people living and talking together. And when you are in, music, food, dance, all the Chagall stuff, right? That's civilization. That's higher than politics. That's higher than politics. And I think about, my faith leader. I'm an Ismaili Muslim, and we're kind of the Catholics of Islam, in the sense of we have a single leader who guides the practice and interpretation and the philosophy and theology of the tradition. And now it's Aga Khan V, because the previous Aga Khan IV, died roughly 15 months ago. But for 70 years, it was Karim al-Husseini Aga Khan. And I remember he did for Ismailis, the event where the imam is present with you is known as a didar. He did a didar in Chicago 17 years ago. And I know this because my son, or 18 years ago, because my son, who's 18 now, was 3 months old at the time. And he says at the end of his remarks, which are like treated like the Pope speaking for Catholics, right? At the end of his remarks, he says almost offhandedly, he says, I understand there's going to be dandiya ras, which is a form of dance, and biryani tonight. That's good. Life should be enjoyed. Life should be enjoyed. And I found that so moving that like the religious leader of my faith, and it's not actually like totally exceptional for him to say something like that. It's just that in this moment when the religious leader is present with you and giving guidance on how you should live your life, he is pausing to say, I'm glad you're gathering for feast, food, and dancing tonight. Life should be enjoyed. It's a theology. So you saying joy is important? Yeah, man, joy is important.
It's the whole ballgame.
Yeah, it's the whole
really
ballgame.
is. I mean,
it's the whole ballgame.
It is because there are reminders as we in culture at every moment from Ben Sass's podcast to Artemis that watching that reminds us of we're all on this shiny blue orb together, and this is what we have. This is what we know, and it helps put things into perspective.
Yeah, and to say look like. Carl Sandburg read about, like life is seeing the Hungarian immigrant, and he's writing in the early 20th century in Chicago, right? Like Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans coming into the city in droves. Life is watching the Hungarian with his family having a picnic by the lake, right? Like that is high culture, right? Like this is what a city does. This is what a civilization does. You create a space for people to find expressions of joy. And both the fact of it, I loved hearing Taylor Sheridan talk, right? Like both touching the fact of it and then reflecting upon the meaning of it, it's all important.
It's funny you say my dad is a Hungarian immigrant. 1956 came over, and I saw him cry twice in my life. Once when his mother died, and once when he was telling me about what it felt like to see the Statue of Liberty after a long boat voyage across the Atlantic, and be able to picture his new life in the United States. And there was such a joy there that even he was telling that story probably some 60 years after it had happened, yet that momentous joy was still there.
Yeah. And here's his son working for a U.S. president, right? Like that's
awesome.
That's
what
the
a
American
world.
dream. Yeah,
it
right.
absolutely is. What a world. That's what makes America so great in my mind. But an important part of that is faith in America. And you've started talking about it a little bit, but you have gotten the Bush Institute citation, deservedly so, for your work with
Very
Interfaith
honored
America.
by that. Chris put his thumb on the scale.
And that is a that is a potent thumb, I must say. The scale had no.
I will flash it a little bit for the video audience.
The scale had no chance. Tell us about Interfaith America.
Yeah. So look, I started this organization when I was 19. When I was 22 years old in 1998. Okay, it was the summer before heading off to graduate school, and the big idea was there were a number of organizations around at the time: Teach for America, City Year, Public Allies, places that I admired a lot that were bringing young people from different backgrounds together in service projects. And they paid a lot of attention to race and geography and class and ethnicity. I thought all those things were important. And I was becoming more religious myself at the time. I was a major admirer of Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker. I was reading my way kind of across social action theologies and different faiths. I would wind up, back in my own religious tradition of being in a Smiley Muslim, which is how I was raised. But a lot of us have what I call an adolescent discrimination against the familiar, which, it's what I had at the time at 22. But I just thought to myself, faith is such a powerful vehicle that inspires serving others. We should be tapping into that and bring young people from different faith traditions together to serve others. So that was the kind of shape of the vision back in the summer of 1998. And fast forward, almost 30 years, and it's a much wider vision about American democracy. But the beating heart of it, and I love the title of the forum today, The Heart of America. The beating heart of it really is that faith inspires serving others. And serving others builds democracy. And if we can do this constructively across lines of difference, which is to say, if we can learn how to disagree on some fundamental things like matters of doctrine, but agree on other fundamental things like the importance of serving others in the form of like the things that 15-year-olds can do, like my son, would go spend time at a senior center once a week in high school, all the way up to really profound, sophisticated things like building hospitals and university systems, which is also what faith communities can do. That is such an essential part of building a diverse democracy, because it is how we express the core of our identities in ways that are true to those identities, but also serve the wideness of society. I just think it's the most powerful thing that Catholics and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Baha'is build hospitals out of the inspiration of their own particular faith community that serve people of all faith communities. I just think it's remarkable. And it is such an important part of the American project. And that's really what Interfaith America is about. It's about working with young people and civic institutions from Southern Methodist University, which is the campus we're on right now, to Catholic Charities, the YMCA, Habitat for Humanity, working with these institutions to help them become cathedrals of pluralism, cathedrals of this ethic of respect for different identities, relationships across communities, and cooperation on concrete projects that serve the common good.
So, many years ago, this is the first time we're meeting in person, Eboo, but many years ago, you may not even remember, it was COVID. My colleague and I, Bill McKenzie, actually interviewed you for this series we were doing called Democracy Talks, where we were looking at different things, exciting things that were happening around our democracy to help our audience better understand this crazy place we are in of 340 million profoundly different people. And you actually mentioned that hospital example, that you could have a Jewish hospital with a Muslim orderly and an atheist CEO,
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I'm going to ask you to maybe define our terms a little bit in terms of what do we mean by pluralism and what do we mean by something like religious freedom. But I'm just conceptually, your vision of the hospital, the way you told that stuck with us. I mean, we couldn't get rid of it. In fact, we put it in this new resource that we just put out called We the People, Pluralism in Real Life. And that's front and center. This, when you think about pluralism, think about your experience at this hospital and how wonderful that is. So baseline it. What are these things called pluralism and religious freedom?
Well, so principles, right? We define pluralism as respect, relate, cooperate. You respect different identities. Mm-hmm. You relate positively across differences. You cooperate with the people you're with on concrete projects to serve the common good. And to take it to a hospital example, like literally every room in a hospital is that. You have people from different religious identities in a moment in which religion really matters, right? Because you're like heading into a surgery and the surgeons are praying and the nurses are praying and the patient is praying and the patient's family is praying and the patient's friends are praying, and they're all from different religions. And like literally you watch surgeons cross themselves before walking into a room, right? They have the skills to do it. They have the knowledge to do it, but they know there's some things out of their control, right? And so that is cooperation on a concrete project for the common good. It is respect for different identities. Nobody ever says, please don't pray that way in front of me at a hospital. In fact, what a surgeon would say is there a family prayer practice that you have that you would like us to give you room for? Do you need a place to cleanse yourself for Muslim prayer beforehand? Right? Do you need a quiet space for Buddhist meditation, right? So that's a respect for identity, but it's also an indication of relationship. Like we are in a relationship here. We surgeons, you as a patient, the nurses, we're in a relationship here because we're around this idea of cooperating on something very concrete, right? And it's so every day at a hospital that we forget how special it is. We forget how special it is for a Jewish doctor at a Catholic hospital to deliver a baby for a Muslim family and say, who will be whispering the Shahada in this baby's ear? I'm getting emotional thinking about that. Like, because that was like literally how my kids were born, literally. It's how virtually every baby in America is brought into the world in that way. There's a very good chance that the doctor is somebody from a different religion, there's a very good chance that the hospital was founded by people from a very different religion. And the question is always, what is the ritual practice of your community when a baby is born? Because we are going to make space for that.
So there's another piece to this, the story and the way you tell it, and perhaps it's the most important part of it. I think a lot of people might hear what you just said, and it's this vivid image, but they might think to themselves, that's kind of unremarkable because that happens every day. I take that for granted. But you talk about how truly extraordinary this ordinary thing is in our society when you compare it to other places in the world. Would you talk a little bit about that?
So this occurs to me when I run across a story in the New York Times some years back, which opens with the line, it's about Mostar, the city of Mostar in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Okay? And it's a city that is not in hot conflict right now. It was during the mid-90s, but it's not in hot conflict right now. And the story opens with the line, when there is a fire on the Muslim side of Mostar, the Catholic fire department does not respond. And when there's a fire on the Catholic side, the Muslim fire department does not respond. And it goes on to describe this city that is totally segregated along ethno-religious lines. Catholics and Muslims go to school in the same school buildings, but at different hours of the day. Wow. Literally, Catholics go to school from 8 to 1 and Muslims from 2 to 7, right? And they root for different soccer teams and they go to different cafes. There are different garbage collection companies.
Wow.
Like the only integrated institution in the whole city is the garbage dump. And the Catholic and Muslim garbage collection companies collect the garbage from their neighborhoods and take it to the integrated dump, okay? So I'm reading this story and I'm thinking to myself, wow, you know what this describes? Most of the human condition over most of human history. It's so straightforward. Identity communities, Catholics, Muslims, whatever, build institutions to serve their own people. That's most of human history. It's the most natural thing in the world. Why am I building a garbage collection company for you? Right? So we humans organize ourselves by identity communities. Okay, it's a nicer way of saying tribes, right? And those identity communities know that they need a set of things to make life happen, and they build those things for themselves. And you know what a fire department easily doubles as during times of tension? A place to raise a militia. So if there's tension between Muslims and Catholics in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the young men gather in the fire department. They're no longer putting out fires on their side of town. They're now fighting the other folks. And so part of what I want to do is say, even during this time of hyperpolarization and like really bitter hatred between red and blue and whatever else, you know, I mean, what's the study that just came out that of 19 countries, Americans are the only democracy that say that where a majority say they don't trust the majority of
I think they say they're morally bad,
yeah,
right? They're morally bad.
That they believe that over half of the citizens of their nation are morally bad. Okay. So that's dangerous. Okay. And I bet you your kid's piano teacher or little league coach or fourth grade drama teacher is somebody from the other side. And so part of what I want to point out is that in our everyday lives as Americans, we actually cooperate across lines of difference pretty regularly. And we should tell those stories to ourselves. One of the things that I think about Americans is that we're very practical people, which is to say, there are many things that are easier in practice than they are in theory. So let's point to the places this is actually happening. Let's point to the number of times that the fire department responds to people who voted differently than those guys did, right? So like the firefighters, they have an American flag on the fire truck, right? But they're responding to houses that are flying all kinds of flags. Yeah. Right? That's their job. And they actually take pride in it. And so I want us to point out the places where we respect, relate, cooperate in a regular way. We just think it's normal, but we actually deep in our hearts know it's kind of inspiring. So my mom, my mom is a friend in a senior home, like a very senior home, yes. Right? And it's just in the western suburbs of Chicago. It's not like the Lower East Side or something like that. The western suburbs of Chicago. And I was not, in about 5 minutes, I think I heard 7 languages. Wow. And by the way, that's like every senior home in America. I promise you, the people working in every senior home in America are all kinds of shades of skin color. They come from the 4 corners of the earth. They pray in a dozen different ways, and they are taking care of your great-grandmother. And you know what? I don't know what their papers say, but I bet you have an investment in that person taking care of your great-grandmother, right? So I want to point that out. I want to point it out not in a gotcha type of way, but in a, isn't this important, number one? And number two, isn't this inspiring? And number three, isn't this actually what the European founders talked about? And shouldn't we be trying to do more of this? I don't want to play the gotcha game. As mad as I am about lots of things going on, I don't want to spend my time telling that story. I don't want to feed that wolf. Right. You know, like I guess I ultimately think like good things overcome bad things. And I want to tell the story of the things in America that inspire me. And I think that wins over time.
One of my favorite parts of the Bush Museum going through is a video in the days after 9/11, where President Bush went to an interfaith temple and said that that this isn't a, like, let's not blame Muslims. This is about terrorists, not about Muslims after 9/11. And that, I think, was an important leadership moment. When you look at leaders in all walks of life, whether that's in business or in local communities, how can leadership really set the right examples, and what can leaders do to if what you're saying is resonating, how can leaders actively help with this?
Well, this happened to be the centerpiece of my remarks today. So I actually know the details of this. Okay. September 17th, 2001. George Bush goes to the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C. It's not an interfaith temple. It's a mosque. Why is that important? Because lots of Americans at that time were conflating Islam and Muslims with terrorism. Mm-hmm. So President Bush does not invite 4 Muslims to the White House to do a photo op, which would have been like a nice but pretty, we're doing this the quick way. He goes to a mosque, the motorcade. He takes his shoes off before he enters the prayer hall. He spends 45 minutes talking to a set of Muslim leaders. And he goes to the microphone and he gives a robust speech about how Islam as a religion gives comfort to over 1 billion people on the planet, how there are Muslims woven throughout every layer of American society. They are driving you to the airport and they are operating on your child who has leukemia. Muslims are major contributors to the country. And then he says, anybody who would intimidate Muslims for what terrorists did, not Muslims, what terrorists did, you do not represent the best of America. You represent the worst of humankind, and we will find you and we will prosecute you. There are very specific and heartfelt things that President Bush says. It is very clear that this is not like something that somebody else puts on the schedule for 10 minutes. It is very clear that President Bush has said, this is a priority. I am going to do this. It is going to come from my heart because that is how I lead. That is how I lead. And, 25 years later, I remember it viscerally.
To Andrew's point about why that kind of leadership matters, I mean, you could envision a scenario where, from a political perspective, it might have been popular to rally the people around condemning Muslims instead of defending them as Islam as a religion of peace. So he didn't take the easy way out. He instead went to American values. Yeah. That we all have access to these rights of freedom of worship and freedom of religion and freedom of association. And so I'd love to see more of that in our country right now, where we don't tell people what they want to hear, but we tell them what they need to hear based on principles and values. And if I may, you were actually on this podcast recently, Blue City Blues, if I'm getting that right. And I would encourage our audience to listen to the conversation that you had. But correct me if I'm wrong, but the gist of this podcast is, you have some thinkers on the left who are looking at blue as in democratic cities, and they're kind of poking holes in what's working and what's not, and challenging some of the conventional wisdom of their own side. And personally, I think that's a valuable asset of leadership, where, in fact, we talk about this, shameless plug, I'm sorry, in our pluralism playbook, this We the People, about how pluralism isn't just between two groups who disagree, but you need to practice pluralism within your own team, your own tribe. And you go on there and you tell some folks some things that maybe go against the conventional wisdom of some in the Democratic Party. I think specifically you were talking about, and you were very clear about this. You said, not including, Nazis is a specific thing where it's an ideology we must condemn, and they have no place in a free and democratic society. But I think the host pushed you, not in a way that was mean-spirited or anything like that, but they said, well, what about people who don't respect others? Should we let them into the conversation? And they were asking this, what I interpret to be fairly seriously, and you responded in not a flippant way, but just you said, I think when they challenged you on this, you said, welcome to life. Basically meaning, in life, there are people who we don't agree with. You may find what they say disrespectful, you may find it silly, you may find it absurd, you may even find it dumb, but we're all members of this society, and we have to find ways to interact with one another, because we talk about the feel-good stuff with pluralism, the bridge building, the coalition building, cooperation, and that is all essential. I'm not saying it's not, but part of pluralism, I would argue, is that friction. When we rub up against one another, how do we deal with that? How do we accept that those who share this country with us think so differently than we do? Would you talk about this kind of welcome to life for Mark, and how we handle that friction?
Yeah. So thank you for listening to that podcast. I really enjoyed doing that. So there's this great line in Game of Thrones where one of the characters says, you make peace with your enemies, not with your friends, right?
Yeah.
Like a permutation on that is you need pluralism for the people you disagree with, not the people you agree with, right? Like what real pluralism is the ability to disagree on some fundamental things and work together on other fundamental things. And go back to the hospital example, right? Those people disagree on lots and lots of things. Okay, the surgeons could have voted for different people. Do we want to live in a country where surgeons who voted for different people refuse to do heart surgery together? So if you refuse to do heart surgery with a surgeon who you found out was a Nazi, I understand. Okay, but if we start to live in a nation in which people in institutions where we need them to work together, from preschool teachers to little league coaches to surgeons, where they decide that their partisan differences are more important than that cooperative civic activity, that is a really dangerous point to come to, right? And one of the stories I tell about this is a few years back, my son was playing on a little league team, which happened to have as the assistant coaches, two dads, one who was known to be a pretty pro-Palestinian guy, and one was known to be a pretty pro-Israel guy in my neighborhood. Both nice guys, everybody liked them. These were their faith commitments, their ethnic commitments, and where their homelands were, and it was a time of tension in the Middle East. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, is the tension and turmoil in the Middle East going to cause a rupture in this team in the Midwest? Like, are these guys going to be able to coach together? And it wasn't a problem. You know why? Because the kids called them first base coach and third base coach. And that is the genius of Little League Baseball. That is the genius of the civic infrastructure of American life. We have so many institutions in America that bring people into a common space to do a concrete activity that is, for most of us, non-controversial, that guides cooperative relationships. And we couldn't be a nation without that, really, right? Because if you didn't have Little League Baseball, if you didn't have like a sense that like my enlightened self-interest is involved in this baseball team holding together, because my kid plays on it. If you didn't have the PTA, if you didn't have bowling leagues, if you didn't have all of these institutions that just in a centripetal way, brings people towards a center where they're focusing on a concrete activity that's non-controversial, and they have to cooperate to get it done, our partisan divides would tear us apart. And right now we live at a time where there are, in fact, examples of city councils and local libraries and hospital theater programs and the occasional hospital that is, in fact, torn apart over partisan differences. And that is a profound threat to, I think, the very definition of America. And that is why this conversation about we have to disagree better, we cooperate across our differences, remember all the differences that the European founders had, remember the differences that people had over the course of time in America, and they still committed to build a nation where people from a variety of backgrounds could thrive. That, I operate, I guess, from a center-left posture, so to speak, but I'm Team America. I'm Team America.
The great philosopher Joe Buck said recently here at the Bush Center that one of the best things about sports, like you go to a hockey game and your team scores a goal and there's a stranger in the seat next to you and you don't ask them, you don't wait to high five and say, wait, are you Democrat or Republican before I can high five you? You high five the stranger and you celebrate together, and it's it's one of those little things, like you said, that's a part of who we are.
It's a big thing, and after after the hockey series is over, the guys line up and they take off the helmets and they shake hands. And after the playoff football game is over, these big burly guys who spent 3.5 hours pounding on each other hug and congratulate each other. And that's the most important moment in American civilization. It's when team rivals on the basketball court or the football field or the hockey rink are congratulating each other after the game, because it sends a signal to rivals after any event in which you're on different teams. When the thing is done, you're Team America.
One of the things that you've spoken about too is the idea of a melting pot versus a potluck, and we've often used the cliche of America as a melting pot, but can you talk some more about that concept?
Yeah. So obviously a melting pot melts everybody's identities into like a common goo. By the way, the melting pot metaphor was thought of as progressive at the time it was written, which was 1907, 1908, in a play by a guy named Israel Zangwill, who was a Russian Jewish immigrant. And it was progressive because the idea was, don't bring your conflicts from over there over here, okay? I want to just pause for a moment on the kind of theme of how special America is. When we actually had a refugee resettlement program, which we don't really anymore, but when we actually had one, we resettled both sides of civil wars across the world. Just think about that for a second, right? So you're like resettling Bosnian Muslims and Serbian Orthodox Christians. You can only do that if you believe that the conflict is contextual and not inevitable. And that if people move to a different context, namely America, where it is not okay to prosecute ancient hatreds on American soil, those relationships will change. And 99% of the time they do. So Japanese Americans and Korean Americans are friends, even though there's generations of conflict. Indians and Pakistanis, when they move to America, they move to the same 12 square blocks in Chicago, the West Devon neighborhood, right? It is this belief that America is a context where people of different identities can retain their identity, can speak, can pray in Sanskrit or pray in Arabic, and come together and build something greater, which is what a potluck supper is. You retain your identity. A potluck is really boring if everybody brings the same dish. And it's actually really special when somebody brings a dish that's inspired by their distinctive identity. This, Andrew, to your heritage, this is the dish I would make with my dad. This is a Hungarian feast dish. And we would make it at this time every year.
Chicken paprikash.
Yeah. And I'm bringing it to the potluck. And I want to know not just what your dish is, but I want to know the story behind it, the identity that inspired it. And then I want to try it. But most interestingly, I want to put both our dishes on the same plate and see what happens if there's some interesting combinations, right? So that's America. People retain their distinct identity. They bring the dish to the table that is inspired by that distinct identity. They try each other's dishes. They combine dishes in new ways. This is where jazz comes from. This is where rock and roll comes from. This is where hip hop comes from. So many distinctive American creations are actually interesting integrations of multiple particular heritages.
Bruce Springsteen has a lot of various roots in his musical style.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to see him in a couple weeks in Chicago for like the 50th time, for like the 50th time. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, what happens? And this is potentially a difficult question, but I know you have a good answer to this. What happens when the very dish that you bring to the potluck that you are proud of, that you think this is what is best about your culture and you want to share it with others, is offensive to those at the dinner table?
So I love this question. And the reason is because I've actually lived this story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So after I graduated from college, I moved to Chicago and I was so lonely for like months and months and months because, you don't have the kind of dorm collective life that you had in college. You just take for granted like how concentrated that community is. So I started having potlucks after about 6 months of living in Chicago. And I lost so many nights of sleep because of the vegans. I had so many vegan friends and sometimes they could be touchy, right? So I'm like, somebody's gonna bring meatloaf and the vegans are gonna be mad and like it's gonna be a thing, right? And it never happened. You wanna know why? Because most of the time people will ask, hey, who else is coming to the potluck? So that I can bring a dish that is appropriate for this community. And that's the great part of It's Just Life, right? So if there's a lot of Jews and Muslims coming to the potluck, maybe don't bring pork. And most of the time, because human beings are actually nice and they want to both be distinctive, but also a good citizen of a community, they'll figure out they won't bring the pork Cuban sandwiches that they're really proud of. They'll bring the chicken Cuban sandwiches that they're really proud of, right? And even though meat was at the potluck, the vegans avoided it and people figured out, let's have a meat table and a non-meat table, and people would try, their famous meatloaf recipe. They would try the lentil loaf version of that. So it's a great example of how human beings kind of naturally will adapt their distinctiveness, still remain distinctive, but adapt it so that it is appropriate for the particular community that's showing up. And one of the things I love about potlucks is no general, no president, no governor can command you to do it. People do it themselves. Yep. It's like the ultimate civic form, and people themselves will adapt what they bring in order to be a good citizen of the community. And by the way, I want to say being a good citizen of the community is still being part of your identity group, yep. Right? Like the potluck needs your identity inspired dish. And that identity inspired dish is ideal if lots and lots of people can enjoy it and eat it.
Right? And not to kill the metaphor here, but I mean, when you come to the potluck and you're respecting what others can and cannot do, still showing something of your own identity, that doesn't prohibit you from enjoying the meal that you want with your own family, your own house,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. Like, that's exactly right. And which is why I love this notion of, political philosophers will call it a community of communities. I think this is what John Rawls called it, what Martin Marty called it. America is a community of communities. And there's things, I'll tell you something, the biryani, not that I make biryani, but if I did make biryani, the biryani that I brought to the potluck would be considerably less spicy than the biryani that I made at home. And by the way, this is like most households that have spicy food. Like my mom will literally ask, basically she'd be like, are your white friends coming over? Because it'll still be my biryani, but it will be a kind that will not send them to the hospital, right?
Chris is still adapting to Texas life.
I think I'm sweating right now.
Yeah.
Well, we could take the entire afternoon if we let you. Chris would still be sitting here talking to you at 7 p.m. if we let him. But we've got to let you get off to lunch and then back off to your flight to get back. But you've been so generous with your time here at the Bush Center today. You've traveled out of your busy schedule. Make sure if y'all are interested to learn more about Interfaith America at interfaith.org. Is that right?
Interfaith. I think it's
interfaithamerica.org.
That's right. Interfaithamerica.org.
There it is. That I left off an important word there. But,
yes.
Eboo, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
I want to thank the two of you, not just for this podcast, but for your contributions to this really important institution, the Bush Institute, and preserving the legacy of President Bush. I had the chance to meet him today, and he's hilarious. He says to me, he says to Mrs. Bush, he turns to her and says, "Did you see the guy in the kilt? Why is he wearing a kilt?" And as I'm walking up, getting my photo with him at the time, he looks at me, he's like, "How come you're not wearing a kilt?" You know?
We did have a guy in a kilt.
Yeah, right,
People should know that.
But he's so comfortable. He makes other people feel so comfortable. I just want to, I want to thank you for preserving, like, the beautiful distinctiveness of his presidency and persona.
We are proud to do it. That is a day in and day out. How lucky am I to get to do this, and get to meet incredible people who are living life the same way like yourself. I appreciate it.
Thanks, friends.
It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.